So Hunter, what are your reflections on Climate Week so far?
I think if you three months ago, everybody thought this was going to be a sort of like sleepy, sad climate week, and yeah. And I think it's been quite the opposite. I think actually people have come in really energized. Like there's a recognition that this is a new phase. We're past 1.5 degrees of warming. The LA fires were a big wake up call for people. The Texas floods, and so resilience and adaptation are front and center. And at the same time, everybody is very aware that mitigation needs to happen so that we're on a better trajectory. And I think the other thing that has also been inspiring is that there's still plenty of leadership around. I was at the UK Consul General, your countrymen, they had a Clean Britannia breakfast, and, they made it very clear that we are here. The head of Octopus Energy was there, the Deputy Prime Minister. And so, the Brits are, and the joke I made is keep calm and climb it on. Like, they're not going to be shaken. They're going to keep moving forward. And then yesterday at the Climate Mayors event, there's 35 mayors there, their largest attendance yet. And, local leadership is strong. And so the point is that, we have spent a long time trying to find this big kumbaya moment where the whole world rallies around climate action. And the reality is we just have to get it done by any and all means now.
And can you talk to any key themes or concerns that you're hearing this year that you haven't heard in previous years? Anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I think there's been a real wake-up call on adaptation and resilience, and specifically because of the insurers. Like when you tell the story of the climate movement, we're going to owe a huge debt to the insurers because they have taken climate risk from an unpriced 4 out of 10 thing that sat in the ESG bucket that has now thoroughly started to be priced in. It's going to be priced in much more, but it's now very clearly a risk return issue.
So can you tell us a bit about Resilience Investments, your company? How did it start? How did the team come together? What's your thesis?
So we actually owe a lot to the Brits once again. My co-founder is Jay Lippman, and we kept on looking at what was next. And it was clear that it was real estate. It's the world's largest asset class. It's 40% of emissions. And we saw insurers pulling out of Florida and California. And so it was clear that climate risk had a price signal. And what that all adds up to is around the background of affordability issues that already exist in the United States and so many countries around the world. Now you start pricing in, climate risk through insurance. You start having rising utility costs because of basically extreme heat and AI energy demand. And so there are now basically very clear affordability pressures that are going to push people away from the Sunbelt and towards the Great Lakes. And so we have to make sure that as folks migrate to those regions, that there is housing, jobs, everything else to receive them. And so for North America, that is the future of the country, is it will be around the Great Lakes.
Mm-hmm. So this kind of eternal migration theme is something you're very bullish on.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's an inevitability, and it's actually already happened. So July 2024 of last year, the San Francisco Fed published a study that the historical migration from basically what was called the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt has broken down and is now moving in reverse for key demographics, 20 to 29, 60 to 69, and those with 4 more years of college. And that's being driven by affordability. Wall Street Journal and Realtor.com just published their summer housing report, and the top 20 performing markets are all in the Midwest and Northeast. And what's interesting is that the Wall Street Journal, not famous for being a climate forward publication, basically highlighted 2 issues, affordability and climate resilience. And so when the Wall Street Journal is recognizing that climate resilience is an important factor in how people are selecting how and where to live and where to buy homes and where to invest, tells you that it's here.
But in terms of then how you're thinking about generating returns, is it the argument that there are enough properties that are resilient in these regions, they need to be built, and there's going to be demand that pulls in this building? Or is it how else are you thinking about making returns here?
Yeah, so it's very simple, actually. So institutional investors have overwhelmingly concentrated in the Sunbelt. So many of the publicly traded REITs have between 70 and 90% of their portfolios concentrated in the Sunbelt. Yep. Wow. And for many of them, Florida is their largest holding, right? And so if you look at that, that means that the Great Lakes have largely been overlooked, even though today they deliver better in-place yields. So we're not even assuming any climate migration, right? We're just buying in the place that delivers the best returns today. But if you screen for climate risk, then you have the ability to see the future, essentially, because as climate risk is priced in and insurance becomes more and more of a factor, what it's already doing is depressing asset values. You can't get a home without paying for a mortgage with insurance. And so the more you spend on insurance, the less you spend on the home. And so the value of the home goes down. So if you move now and you basically buy those more resilient assets, there will be a flight to quality, and there's basically an unpriced alpha there.
And what is your for want of a better term, secret sauce for like analyzing these trends? Like, what do you consider your moat?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think there's multiple moats. I'm not going to give them all away because we're
all your competitors are listening.
Oh, there you go. No, but I think the big part of how we think of investment in general, we owe a lot to our co-founder Ashby Monk, and so he's at Stanford. He's a professor of long-term investing, and he basically said for the last 20 years we've sort of had two investment models: risk return and ESG, right? And we've suffered a double penalty because of that. Risk return has sort of ignored things like unpriced climate risk that now show up as priced climate risk through insurance. And then ESG has never had the rigor of risk return. And so everything ends up being concessionary, and so it doesn't scale. For us, there is one investment model, which is resilience. Now, in practice, if you look at insurance, that was based on backwards looking analytics, right? Now it has to move to forward looking analytics. And so really you're just taking your core risk return model and starting to layer in forward-looking assumptions about how assets will behave. And so, I mean, that's pretty much the simple thing, right? If you're talking about being climate-proof, it's about doing the most basic thing that an investor is supposed to do. Look forward, predict the future. Past performance is not a predictor of future success. And actually, most real estate investors are basing how they think the market will behave on the past.
Yes, sometimes I've come up against folks in financial industry who say, oh, these forward-looking data, forward-looking assumptions, there's no such thing. It's all just guesswork, it's all just model outputs. But they're like, well, if all investing is making a bet on the future and trying to use the data that you had in the past, but also now using tools like AI to kind of project into the future better than we could before, and use those insights to inform investments. I don't think it is that outlandish to be factoring in climate into these investment issues.
No, at all. And I mean, the reality is actually our models for expected losses are quite good. And if you know what expected losses would be at the asset level, then you know what the insurance premium should be. Now, that doesn't mean that that's what it will be because of market forces and everything else, right? But, if you assume that, it will start to move in that direction, it doesn't have to move all the way there, right? Which inevitably it will be because essentially governments can no longer bail out these systems, then actually you have an unfair advantage. But the great thing is that with investing, in the climate movement, we often would try and convince everyone to agree. In the investing movement, I don't need to convince everyone. I'm very happy to have somebody be a climate denier and put all their money in Florida. Like, go for it. Take the other side of the trade. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're wrong. Again, investors will decide who to deploy capital with.
So on this mispricing point, like I've been writing about climate change and financial risk management for like 6 years now, and the mispricing argument has been used since even before then, right? The Mark Carney 2015 speech, Tragedy of the Horizon. And it always seems the mispricing is going to be corrected for next year. There's going to be a sudden correction, right? And I think a lot of the early days of kind of climate and financial institutions was like, okay, we need to avoid these abrupt mispricings and these abrupt corrections of the market. It's going to be catastrophic on the scale of 2008 financial crisis. And I don't think that's bearing out. It's not borne out so far on the transition side. I do wonder still on the physical risk side, like compound risk events like hurricanes hitting concurrently on East Coast cities, fires in LA happening alongside something else. Like I can start seeing like real financial risk flowing into the financial system. But how do you think about this mispricing question? Like, do you think there's going to be sudden repricings? How's it manifesting?
I think we're in for a slow-moving train wreck over the next 30 years. And that's the reality. It comes down to time horizons, right? Like if you're trying to time the market and get it right, whether it's in public equities, like there are people who do that, they're day traders. I would never touch day trading. But if you're trying to do that, you're going to have a hard time. But if you have a long enough time horizon, right, you actually can start to have some real confidence about what's going to happen. And I think, what's going to, there's basically, we actually do compare it to 2008, the classic Big Short Jenga tower scene. And, the foundation of the real estate market is insurance, right? That's what makes possible mortgages, which is what makes possible asset values, which is what makes possible property taxes, which is what makes possible municipal bond ratings. And it's interesting because the last few weeks I've sort of had a back-to-back. I was at an insurance conference 2 weeks ago, and there it's a 5-alarm fire. They know how bad it is. Insurance has realized it. Real estate, they're semi in denial because they're like, well, as long as I can get good enough, cheap enough insurance on my portfolio, I'm fine. They're not thinking about the full market effects. And then, unfortunately, here at Climate Week, obviously there's a lot of talk about public finance. and they have not recognized the degree to which most of their tax base is property taxes, and that you're heading for some serious municipal downgrades. And you're looking at the collapse of entire communities financially.
So one argument I'm thinking about pushing, and it might be controversial in kind of like the climate advocacy space, is that I kind of want to see folks who are doing climate related deals, especially adaptation deals, be seen as like rainmakers in the institutions, right? In the big banks, in asset managers, private equity. I think if we can start showing that you can make real serious money in these investments, that will encourage more people into that space, right? And I think that was one of the issues we had with kind of climate mitigation argument, especially in the banking world, is that it was kind of hived off into, yes, we need to fill out this commitment that we've made to give $100 billion of investment into this envelope of activity. Whereas I'd actually really like to see in the adaptation world, like companies like yours be really successful. And obviously you've written up in the Wall Street Journal, like double-digit returns that are resilient investments. And I'm wondering, like, do you see, how do you see that happening? And do you agree with that thesis? And what are your kind of expectations for the returns of a company like yours versus a REIT, a real estate investor who isn't taking into account these?
Well, just to be clear, I can't promise any returns on this podcast.
Very good.
But I think it's important, like, you're absolutely right. We need to make as much money as possible doing this. And I'll tell you why. It's very simple, right? Philanthropy is 2% of most people's money, right? Governments are broke already, and certain governments, at certain levels, I'm not going to say any, have chosen to pull back from this and be in outright denial. And so when you look at where the bulk of the work is going to be done, it is going to be done by private capital. And specifically, it's going to be done by institutional investors. So it is pensions, sovereigns, endowments, insurers. They manage $100 trillion. They think in decades. They are the people who put the capital in capitalism. And those are the folks that we need to take care of. And we need to deliver the returns that they need. Now, actually, with a lot of institutional investors, they're not fundamentally day traders. They think on long-term time horizons. And so it's not that they necessarily need outlandish returns, right? But they need returns that hit their targets. So whether it's a mid-teens IRR or something like that. And we need lots and lots of solutions that can slot into their portfolios. That's precisely why we were founded. They have real estate investments. They need things that can position in there. And look, here's the thing that is, I think, just really important to understand about humans in general. They copy success.
Yeah.
And so the more success we have with this sort of forward-looking approach that includes all this alternative data, the more copycats we will have, and nothing will make me happier than if we are all being copied because we're being so successful at taking climate action on adaptation, resilience, mitigation, just an equitable transition.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think in the finance world, the example of these Bitcoin treasury companies, right? You started with strategy, and now you have these other companies that are all just buying Bitcoin and seeing good returns. And actually that arbitrage might be going away, but in the meantime, a lot of capital went towards that. And I hope the same would happen with climate finance and adaptation.
And it's, so Jay, my co-founder, right? He just hosted the Nat Gala, which is all about launching a movement called Nature 2, which is to drive 2% of institutional investment to nature-based investing. And that's because there's a $800 billion finance gap for nature. Again, philanthropy will not cover it. Government will not cover it. It is going to have to be private capital. Can you slot it into an institutional investment portfolio? And that is really, the Archimedes lever that allows us to actually change the direction of the world. And again, why are we doing this? Yes, would we personally like money? Absolutely. Do we want to make lots of money for our investors to make them happy? Yes. But the chance to scale these investments, to scale impact, right? Because it's not much good to be a billionaire in a 3-degree world. They're more than welcome to live in their bunkers, but I would like to be able to go for a walk in nature and have some nature around me. Yeah.
Now, finally, you mentioned before we start recording your Dutch background, UK background, and I'm wondering what lessons you're drawing actually from the wider world beyond the States, from your own background, from talking to people in other jurisdictions where the policy environment is different, where actually making fiscal risks from climate are much more present or much more immediate. Can you talk about some lessons you're taking from?
Yeah. So, humans are a cultural species. So if you look at a toddler, it is a pre-cultural human. Over the course of growing up, we download culture, and that's not just language and customs for food and dance and religion, but it's also ways of thinking, ways of knowing, and so on and so forth. And so the thing that the climate movement doesn't talk enough about is culture, because that's really what's going on here. The Dutch have, there are some struggles. Absolutely. Everybody has struggles in figuring these things out. but fundamentally the Dutch were culturally prepared for this moment. Half the country is already below sea level. All right, we've dealt with chronic flooding for much of our history. We also went through a bunch of religious sectarian wars and have had to learn how to coexist and work through differences and everything else. Now, not perfect, but by contrast, the Americans, it's a massively individualistic society, right? That's great for entrepreneurship, right? It's part of why you have such a robust, innovative economy here. But when you start to have group challenges, Americans really struggle. And you need large outside threats to basically focus them. So did we do well with World War II? Yes, phenomenal, right? When Sputnik went up and we sort of realized we were losing the space race, did we rally around the Apollo program? Yes, absolutely. But actually, there's a famous quote from a Soviet general at the end of the Cold War. He said, "We're about to do the worst thing to you that we could ever do, deprive you of an enemy."
Good point. Yes.
And so the point is that the Americans, like, what we're really seeing is that it's not anything about the facts or the data or anything like that. It's that America's culture war has sort of polarized this issue. And that's why Americans are really, really struggling with basically finding unity on this, right? It's actually fundamentally, I think, what we're going to see a great opportunity for the country to come together, because the cornerstone of the American dream is the home. It's real estate. And that is now under threat. 67% of many people's primary wealth is tied up in their primary residence. And so it's now an issue where, there's no atheists in foxholes, right? And I think we're going to get to, there's no climate deniers in the insurance market, and we're going to get to a place where there are no climate deniers in the real estate market. Whether they say climate or extreme weather or whatever it may be, fundamentally, it is a dollars and cents issue.
I do wonder on the terminology point, whether that's why resilience is a term that's favored in America, because I think that speaks to the American spirit. Like, we're resilient, we go across the Oregon Trail, we go live in these inhospitable places, and we're resilient, and we can do things off our own backs. And I think that sort of language does kind of work. I do worry sometimes that it's like, okay, there's a bounce back mentality in America. Like, there's a disaster that happens, and like Hurricane Helene, and then the motto is like North Carolina strong, or Houston strong after hurricane hits. It's like, okay, yeah, but someone said to me, I wish it was like North Carolina smart. Like, we're going to invest now to prevent, because we know that another hurricane's going to come. We're going to invest now to make sure that we don't have to do these big rallies and to bring in disaster funds, because we've already prepared for it. But that doesn't seem, that still seems to be a gap. But I do think this resilience talk could spread the divide. I think this resilience talk could bridge the divide here in the States, because every American, I think they're resilient, they can stand up.
Totally. And I also think, look, dollars and cents. America is a capitalist country through and through. And the reality is that, we're now reaching a point where there isn't the option to just continually rebuild, right? You have that post-war dividend, right? You have the luxury to be able to do that, just endlessly rebuild and bail systems out. Already the National Flood Insurance Program had to be done, risk rating 2.0, and that's because premiums did not meet expected payouts. And so, it's very clear for a lot of the mayors that they're probably going to have to start insuring their own buildings. And so when you start to have to pay for things and you start to have to face those financial consequences, right, you start to have to, forward plan and everything else. And again, America has a rich tradition here. Ben Franklin, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We know these things. The challenge for the American people is, there's a famous quote that's attributed to Churchill. You can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And we're now reaching the we've tried everything else point. And I think that there's actually, and I think that's part of the spirit of Climate Week, is that there is a recognition that we cannot do this on our own. We have to pull together. It's larger than any of us. And when America gets to that point, those are our finest hours. And so I think we may actually be seeing a turning point.
Well, I hope the same. And I do think that the work that you're doing, Resilience Investments, provides an example that hopefully will prove lucrative for others to follow, and something that people do want to emulate. So thank you for your work you're doing, and thanks for being here today, Hunter.
Thank you so much, Louis.